Now, following on from my recording of Miss Otis Regrets, where I used only the internal mic of the iPad to create all the parts, I was going to show you basically how I went about it. Now, the mic I'm speaking to you at the moment is this rather nice SE mic. It's a sort of mid-price but very nice large condenser microphone. But the mic in the iPad is this tiny little thing, probably the size of a pinhead. I don't even know where it is. I just point the instrument at the thing, record, and then tinker afterwards. Now that's really the crux of this. It's getting a sound, first of all, that's about the right level, and then just seeing what you can do with it. Now I'm going to start off with the vocal part, because actually the vocals have to be really sort of quite definitely recorded. They have to be it has to sound like a voice. Anything else you can kind of treat subjectively, the piano or the guitar or the bass or whatever, but if it's a voice you have to try and get that sound to work. So this is the vocal line here. Now I'm just going to play this back and I'm going to describe a bit about how I managed to get this sound. Miss Otis regrets she's unable to lunch today. You can hear a lot of hiss on that mic. Now, how am I going to get rid of this? Now, if I open up my plugins page, the settings, if I go into plugins and EQ, you can see that I've got a compressor and a visual EQ. And then if I go back into my main window, you can see also there's a bit of reverb on. Let's take the reverb off for a second and just have a listen to this. Now I'm going to open up the visual EQ pane because I need to just play with this to make sure that it's right. You can see that I cut at about 5 kilohertz. Now the reason I did that was because my voice is a little bit nasally. In fact, if I go to a louder section, here we go, this may be verse 2. Found that a dream. The word dream was a bit nasally. If I take that 5 kilohertz back up. When she woke up and found that a dream. Found that a dream. Just takes the edge off that, and there are a few other words as well. Now notice that in GarageBand you have 3 bands to play with, and you can drag any of those bands anywhere in the frequency spectrum. It's hugely powerful when you consider what we had sort of 20 years ago. Now I've got the very top end here. If I boost that, you'll hear the hiss from the processing and the mic and all that. Found that a dream of love was gone. There you go, there's the hiss. Now the hiss is not made any better by the fact that I've got a compressor. Now if I open up my compressor here, you can see that I've got a fairly draconian compression ratio here of 9:1. That's quite a lot. I mean, for vocals you'd maybe have 5:1, for example, but it depends on the context. If it sounds good to you, the answer is it probably is good. Madam, she ran to the man who had led her so far astray, and from under her velvet gown she drew a gun and shot her lover down. Madam. That's okay. I've actually halved the ratio almost, and it's still okay. If I go to the very last verse, however, and got her, dragged her from the jail. Madam, they strung her up on the willow across the way, and the moment before she died, she lifted up her love. Now when I boosted at about 500, it actually compressed it so much that the rest of the tracks kind of vanished underneath it. So as with any audio track that you record, anything that doesn't require bass end, so vocals, guitars, violins, hi-hats, anything apart from kick drum and bass guitar, you really want to cut the bass end off because it makes the whole mix very much tighter. You haven't got this sort of rumbly mess at the bottom. Only the bass guitar has an EQ that might have a bass boost. In this case it does. And that bass boost is also to compensate for the fact that the mic is very, very small. If I just listen to the bass on its own, there's enough there, and I've actually taken the top end off to try and make it to give the bass its own space. Now, the first instrument that I recorded was the piano. Obviously I haven't got it in my studio. It's at 250 kilograms. It's quite hard to lift and move in. So if I just listen to the piano on its own, now, if you watch that film, then do subscribe to my channel, and thank you very much for watching all the other videos that you've watched on my channel. The piano, I put the iPad on the music stand in the middle. Now, why have I put it in the middle? Well, actually, the piano is mostly playing chords, and they're in the middle of the range. The bass notes, while they are there, they are almost being doubled by the bass part. So it's not actually a huge problem that that the iPad is only picking up the middle of the piano. It's fine. Now, I have put a little bit of reverb on that. Now, the piano is in mono. It is essentially standard practice to record a piano in stereo. You know, a piano is a large instrument. You want to hear the bass notes on the left and the treble notes on the right. We're in mono here, but if you listen to some of those recordings from the 50s, those jazz recordings, the piano's in mono anyway. It's just a very nice mic positioned over a grand piano. And if it's a stereo record, very often the instruments are moved around in the stereo image to give that sort of stereo feel. Now, the bass part I've moved very slightly to the right, the violin's even further to the right, the vocals are to the left, and etc, etc. I've moved things very subtly. You want to be quite careful with very, very sort of draconian stereo. Really, it can sound quite unbalanced, and actually if you're mixing for vinyl you wouldn't want that anyway, because the stylus can jump out of the record if the bass is really heavy on one side and not the other. Now, other parts that I've recorded here, I've recorded the bass part, the violin part at the beginning. Now, I've put some reverb on this. Now, my violin is an 1880s German violin, and really it needs to be quite sensitively handled, well, any violin really. Not too much top end. You want to hear that real rich, you want to record the box really rather than lots of bow. So at the beginning I've got my solo part. If I boost the bass here, you don't hear anything but the sort of boom of the room. Makes it much cleaner if I strip that bass end away. And then with the mid-range, try and find a happy medium as to where the body of that violin is. Now, lots of people would say, well, you know, 10 dB, there's actually a 30 dB boost and cut on here, which is massive, but actually you kind of need that when you're dealing with the internal mic of this. This is the mic that just comes in the iPad. It's not, there's nothing connected to this at all. It's just the iPad. You do have to do a certain amount of compensating for the deficiencies in that mic. You know, it's not going to be this. Music is so subjective. We all say, oh yes, you need a Neumann U87 to record a Fender amp with a Strat through it. The answer is that's nonsense. if you can't afford a U87, it doesn't mean that you can't get a sound that actually makes a difference to your record. And actually, the individual sounds are often the best ones, because you think, oh, what's that? It's something new. You're not just going down the beaten track of all of these different sounds that have been recorded beforehand, and then you have to sort of copy one thing because it's de rigueur. Now, the guitar part at the beginning, I've done a similar thing to this, to the violin here, so that I've got a sort of mid boost and bass cut and treble cut, so I get quite a sort of jazzier guitar sound. Forget all the noise in the background, it's just one of those things. You can't get rid of it because the mic is picking up everything. Now, I've also got some strings here. Now, some backing strings. Now, I've used the mute on my violin here. The mute is something that goes over the bridge that scoops out the mid-range. It just takes some of that mid-range away. In fact, it's easier with the bow. Now, I recorded these string parts with the mute, partly because it's that sort of American schmaltzy sort of harmony sound. It's always the hard thing with recording strings. You don't want everything to sound like Faulty Towers. But it's something that just gives that sort of interlude a little bit of body after the first verse. So I've got the first verse here. Just low-level stuff in the background just gives it that sort of, oh yes, this is the end of verse 1 and we're into the interlude, and then it's verse 2 where the violins actually sort of they overlap with the beginning of verse 2. When she woke up and found. So it's just that one chord underneath verse 2. Now, other parts, I recorded some solo parts and also some backing vocals. Now, the violins I've panned. If I show you the string parts once again, you can see that the pan control has been set sort of willy-nilly. Just, oh yeah, let's fling that one over there, that one over there. Not all the way, but just to give it a sense of a sense of space. Now, I've done that with the backing vocals here. Now, if I play those in context with the beginning of with the other instruments. Now, notice the guitar solo that I've recorded. I actually recorded it all on one track, but I split the track so that I could process the guitar solo differently from the sort of bits that came before. So beforehand it was kind of this sort of sound. Fairly dull sounding guitar, but it's sort of a classical guitar-esque thing, and then made the solo come up a little bit in level because there's more top end there, so you don't necessarily need to boost the volume, although it is very slightly louder. So there is a sort of an overview of how I used this internal microphone to essentially create a sort of a soundscape, as it were. Now, if at the end, I've also used the automation control, actually at the beginning as well. Let's just look at the vocals at the start. If I go into automation, which you can get if you tap on a track, it brings up a window that shows you your volumes. Now, at the beginning, the vocals, you can see that the track is opened up very gradually from 0 or minus infinity dB if you're technologically sort of engineering sort of mind there. If I just go from the beginning of the vocal line, you can hear that the sound comes in very gradually. Miss O. Now, because there's hiss on there, if I took away the automation, there we go, so that it was straight through from the beginning, you'd hear a sudden change in sound before the vocals come in. Miss. You can hear that there's the violin part in the background because I'm using a pair of headphones to record. So really what you want to do is to have something that just comes in so gradually that you don't even know it's coming. Miss O. The first thing I heard there really was just the breath in. On that score with vocal parts, always bring it in so that you can hear the breath that comes in with it, because obviously it's a natural thing. Now going to the end, you can see that I've faded out all of my parts. In fact, yeah, apart from that guitar at the end. If I just go to the ending chord, the idea is to mute everything, or to silence everything gradually, so that to bring it to a nice ending conclusion, and also you're cutting all the hiss that's present on the recording. You can hear the piano chord and the bass are the last to finish. So everything else, if you don't need a part at the end, you can see that the strings were cut off slightly earlier. That just reduces the amount of hiss. I could do the same to that guitar part at the end. There we go. We'll just put those couple of points in there. I'm just going to make sure that that doesn't cut off that last note too much. And there we go. Now, what I also did at the time was to add more bars at the end. If you get to the end of a song, GarageBand automatically goes back to the start. Now, I know this isn't necessarily a massive issue when you're recording, but when you're playing back, if you send this song to iTunes, it is nice to have a little bit of silence at the end. Just so you can get that 3-second gap or whatever it is before your next tune. Perhaps that's a bit too much. If you want to vary, to edit the length, you can do that. You can say, okay, well, let's have 83 bars, for example, and that just brings the ending slightly closer in. But anyway, that's just sort of slight tweaking, really. Now, if I click done on this and then go to my songs, I can then send that to iTunes by simply going to, if I go to see all, Miss Otis Regrets. Of course, my song is, there we go, select Miss Otis Regrets, share, where we go, there we go. Share song, uncompressed. I want to share this without losing any quality, so I'd go to uncompressed and then go to share, and then save to iTunes. There we go. Then it's essentially sharing that file now straight to iTunes. Now, what I'm going to do next, while it's just, in fact, I'll just cancel that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just go through the motions of recording something. I'm going to record something using the internal mic. I'm just going to record something very, very short so that you can see the processes that I went to in order to make this internal mic work. So I'm going to start off with audio recorder instrument. Now, in order to record things dry, they are always recorded dry, but in order that they play back straight away dry, click on Nice Room, go to Fun and Clean. Now that is just essentially just straight in, no processing done, although you have something called Squeeze, which is actually a compressor really, but you can see that it's set to 0 and the tone is in the middle. If you shift the tone all the way to the left, it's more bassy. more to the right, it's more trebly. So I'm going to record something very briefly. Now, this is the bass I used on Miss Otis Regrets. Looking at my input level control, that's fine. Don't worry too much about filling the entire space of that meter. As long as it's showing halfway to 2/3, that'll be fine, because you want to be able to have some room to play with the sort of tone and compression. So I'm going to record. Now I'm going to record this free, as I did with Miss Otis Regrets. So I'm going to switch the metronome off. Notice that I pressed stop a short time afterwards. I want as much control over that sound as possible. Now there was that sort of buzzy fret there, which I can correct afterwards. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play that back while recording some guitar. So I'm going to go plus instrument. I'm going to do fun and clean. There we go. Now, in order to make this guitar sound a little bit more present, I'm going to record 2 of them, which means that I've got to remember what I did and do it twice. So I'm just going to do that once again. Now the reason I'm going to do this is because I want some sort of stereo effect, because everything's mono at the moment, and I don't want to just use the reverb as a way of stereoifying this up. So let's see, hopefully I can remember what I played. So what I'm going to do with those guitars, before I put anything else on, I'm just going to put a violin part on in a minute, is just to do a little bit of processing to make sure that when I put the violin on, I'm sort of playing over something that's, that's sort of more as I would like it. So the guitars, I'm going to take the treble off these a little bit and compress them ever so slightly. And then I'm also going to, with the bass, which was the top one, I'm going to take the top end off and add a bit of bottom end, and then just have a quick listen. Take those guitars down slightly. Now I'm going to ignore the fact that my timekeeping, my rhythm wasn't very good here. I'm going to pan the guitars though ever so slightly, because I recorded 2 of the same thing. Okay, that's more as I would like it to play over the top. So another instrument, I'm going to go just keep the same thing, fun and clean, done, and then put some violin on. So with this, I'm just playing in front of the iPad. I don't know where the mic is, maybe somebody could tell me, but really the answer is you just move around the iPad until you find a sound you want. yeah, there should be a take two on that violin, really. But you know, it's just an idea. It's just to show you sort of kind of how I would go about this. Now, the violin, I use the mute on this, which scoops out the mid-range in an acoustic way. But we may need to boost a little bit, perhaps, in order to make that violin sit in the mix a bit better. A little bit of reverb on that sort of that lead part, but so, well, there's 4 tracks of stuff. I've panned the guitars ever so slightly. The timing went out slightly towards the end. You can't really fix this. If there's a problem with the timing, the bass part was, well, rather the guitar part was slow with respect to the bass. Let's see what happens. Now you can see the trace here. The guitars are ever so slightly behind the bass, but when it gets to here, they're quite a lot behind. Now, if I go to this, split that track, and then I'm going to take this one and move it ever so slightly like that, and the other one as well. And then I'm going to drag this part back slightly. Now the violin part's behind. You can get yourself into a bit of a pickle doing this. It doesn't matter with this. This is just a throwaway sort of idea as to sort of, you know, getting something to work. But you can make very fine adjustments. Now, what I did was I opened it up until the phrase snap to grid off appeared under your transport controls, the record and play and back to the start buttons. And that means that you can edit to very, very fine detail. So you can do quite a lot with this. Ideally, I would get my timing sorted out and, you know, stop fooling about with it. But, you know, it's fine. When you're looking at, and if I'm listening to an edit like this, the best thing to do is to look away. I couldn't hear it that time. I could hear even less that time, so perhaps actually it wasn't such a bad thing. Anyway, so there is a sort of a way of recording with the internal mic. It's very powerful, very nice, and you can get some really interesting sounds out of this. And actually that sort of gypsy jazz thing does thrive on having not much top end. I've never really understood the whole fidelity with the gypsy jazz thing, because the whole thing was born out of that technology of the 1930s, of the gramophone record, which made it sound really tough and quite gritty, which helped the whole string thing, that silky violin. So anyway, there we go. There is the iPad internal microphone.